Welcome to the Sleep Society. Tonight we travel back to the Viking Age, a world of longships, cold northern seas, and people whose reach stretched farther than most imagine. Some Vikings even reached North America around 5 centuries before Columbus, building a small settlement on the edge of an unknown continent. And that is only one of many surprising facts about the Viking Age. So settle in, relax, and join me for more fascinating facts about the Vikings tonight. And if you enjoy calm history like this, please subscribe and come along for more. The Viking Age is often imagined as a time of sudden violence, burning villages, and men appearing from the sea beneath dark northern skies. That image is not completely false, but it is only a narrow window into a much larger world. The Viking Age was not simply the story of raiders. It was the story of a whole society that lived across Scandinavia and beyond, made up of farmers, traders, craftsmen, sailors, storytellers, rulers, and families whose daily lives were shaped by land, weather, belief, and opportunity. To understand this age properly, it helps to begin not with a battle, but with the world that gave rise to it. The Viking Age is usually said to have begun in the late 8th century with the famous raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne in 793. That event became one of the most remembered moments in early medieval European history because it shocked the Christian world. A quiet monastery on the coast of northeastern England was attacked by sea-born warriors from the north, men who seemed to arrive out of nowhere and vanish just as quickly. To the monks and chroniclers who wrote about the attack, it felt like a sign of terror and disorder. Yet from the Scandinavian side, this sudden appearance was not the beginning of history. It was the moment when the wider world finally started paying close attention to people who had already been living, building, sailing, and trading in the north for generations. Scandinavia during this period was not one united kingdom. It was a broad region made up of what we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, along with the nearby islands and connected coastal zones. The land was often difficult, marked by forests, mountains, fjords, rocky ground, and long winters. Good farmland existed, but not everywhere, and life demanded skill, endurance, and flexibility. Communities were often small and local, with power held by chieftains, landowners, and regional leaders, rather than by one strong central authority. People depended heavily on family ties, reputation, practical ability, and mutual obligation. A person's standing in the community came not only from wealth, but from loyalty, bravery, generosity, and the ability to manage both household and alliances. This environment shaped the Viking world in deep ways. The sea was not a barrier in Scandinavia as much as it was a road. Long coastlines, deep inlets, navigable rivers, and island chains made travel by boat more efficient than travel over land in many places. A community that lived near the coast could look outward almost as naturally as inward. Boats connected people to fishing grounds, neighboring settlements, trading partners, and eventually to foreign shores. In that sense, the Viking Age did not emerge from a love of violence alone. It emerged from a maritime culture, one that understood wood, water, weather, and movement better than most others in Europe at the time. The famous Viking longship became one of the clearest symbols of this world. These ships were elegant, flexible, and highly effective. They could travel across open seas, but many could also move up shallow rivers that larger vessels could not enter. Their design allowed Viking crews to strike coastal settlements, move inland, trade in distant ports, and explore new territories with remarkable speed. But longships were only one type of vessel. The people of the Viking Age also built cargo ships, used for carrying goods across long distances. This is important because it reminds us that the same culture known for raids was also deeply involved in trade. The ship that carried warriors one season might carry silver, furs, timber, walrus ivory, or cloth in another. Daily life in Scandinavia was rooted much more in farming than in warfare. Most people in the Viking Age were not full-time fighters roaming from shore to shore. They were ordinary men and women who worked the land, cared for animals, repaired tools, prepared food, managed households, and tried to survive the changing seasons. Farms were the foundation of society. A successful household might keep cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and horses. Fields could produce barley, oats, and rye depending on the region. Fishing and hunting also added to the food supply, especially in harsher areas where farming alone was not enough. Every season brought its own work, and the rhythm of life was tied closely to the natural world. Homes were usually built as longhouses, structures made of timber, turf, or both, depending on local resources. Inside, family members, and sometimes animals, lived under the same roof, especially during cold periods. Fire provided heat and light. Smoke drifted upward through the interior, and daily life unfolded in a shared, practical space filled with work, conversation, and routine. Clothing was made from wool and linen, often carefully produced at home. Tools were precious. Woodworking, ironworking, weaving, and boat building were all essential skills. In such a world, survival depended less on spectacle and more on competence. The Viking Age may be remembered for dramatic voyages, but it rested on thousands of quiet acts of labor. The society of the Viking Age was also shaped by law and public assembly. Although modern people sometimes picture Vikings as chaotic or lawless, they actually had strong traditions of legal order. Disputes were often handled at gatherings known as things, assemblies where free people met to settle conflicts, make agreements, hear judgments, and maintain social balance. These meetings were central to political and community life. They offered a way to resolve violence before it spiraled. Though feuds and revenge certainly still existed, honor mattered greatly, and insults or injuries could have serious consequences. Even so, the presence of law shows that Viking society was more structured than its fierce reputation suggests. Religion before Christianity was another major part of life. The Norse gods were not distant symbols, but living presences in story, ritual, and imagination. Odin, Thor, Freya, and others belonged to a mythic world filled with giants, fate, hidden knowledge, and cosmic struggle. These beliefs helped people make sense of power, luck, war, fertility, weather, and death. Ritual practices likely varied from place to place, and much of what we know comes from later sources. But there is little doubt that religion shaped the way people understood the world around them. Sacrifice, sacred places, and seasonal observances all likely played roles in community life. These stories and beliefs would later survive in written form, becoming some of the most famous myths in world history. So why did Viking expansion begin when it did? Historians still debate the full answer, because no single explanation is enough. Population pressures may have mattered in some areas. Competition among local elites may have pushed ambitious leaders to seek wealth abroad. Advances in shipbuilding certainly helped, making distant travel more practical. The wealth of monasteries and towns in parts of Britain and mainland Europe offered tempting targets. Trade networks were growing, and Scandinavian people were increasingly connected to wider economic opportunities. Political instability elsewhere may have created openings. It is likely that all these factors played a part. The Viking Age began not because one people suddenly changed overnight, but because existing skills ambitions, and conditions aligned in a way that made expansion possible. And once that movement began, it spread in many directions. Danish Vikings became heavily involved in England and parts of Western Europe. Norwegian Vikings pushed into the North Atlantic, reaching places like Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America. Swedish Vikings traveled eastward through river systems into the lands that are now Russia and beyond, connecting with Byzantium and the Islamic world. This eastern dimension surprises many people today, yet it was one of the most extraordinary parts of the Viking Age. Scandinavian traders and adventurers moved along vast waterways, meeting foreign cultures, serving as mercenaries, and carrying silver and goods across huge distances. The Viking world was not isolated. It was intensely connected. That is one of the most important ideas to keep in mind as we begin. The Viking Age was not just a northern fringe disturbing more civilized lands. It was part of a broad and dynamic medieval world. Scandinavians were both feared and admired. They could be raiders, but also settlers. They could destroy monasteries, but also found towns. They could fight kings, then serve emperors. They could preserve old gods while slowly adopting Christianity. In time, they would become woven into the political and cultural history of Europe in lasting ways. So at the true beginning of the Viking Age, we do not find only helmets, axes, and war cries. We find coastlines and cold mornings, small farms and crowded longhouses, legal assemblies and ancestral beliefs, craftsmen shaping timber, and ships waiting at the water's edge. We find a society prepared by geography, skill, and ambition to move farther than most of its neighbors could imagine. The raids would make them famous, but the world behind those raids is what made the Viking Age possible in the first place. For many people outside Scandinavia, the Viking Age first appeared in the form of fear. A monastery on a lonely coast, a village near a river mouth, or a trading port with little protection could suddenly find strange ships on the horizon. The attackers moved quickly, struck hard, took what they wanted, and often disappeared before organized resistance could gather. This speed became one of the great advantages of Viking warfare. They did not always fight the way larger kingdoms expected. Instead of relying only on large, formal campaigns, they often used surprise, mobility, and deep knowledge of coasts and waterways. To those who faced them, it could seem as though danger rose straight out of the sea. Yet even this famous part of the Viking Age becomes more interesting when looked at closely. Viking raids were not random acts of violence carried out by people with no purpose beyond destruction. Raiding was tied to wealth, status, politics, and opportunity. A successful raid could bring silver, weapons, livestock, portable treasures, captives, and above all, reputation. In a society where honor and standing mattered deeply, success abroad could raise a man's position at home. A chieftain who returned with wealth could reward followers, strengthen alliances, and build influence. Raiding was therefore not only about what was stolen, it was also about what could be built afterward through the display and redistribution of that wealth. Monasteries were often early targets, not simply because they were Christian, but because they were vulnerable and rich in movable valuables. Many monasteries possessed metalwork, precious objects, books with decorated covers, stored food, and little military protection. To Christian chroniclers, attacks on such places felt especially shocking because monasteries represented holiness, peace, and learning. Their accounts helped shape the image of Vikings as enemies of civilization itself. But to a Scandinavian raiding party, a monastery might have looked less like a sacred refuge and more like a poorly defended storehouse on the coast. This does not make the violence less real, but it does help explain why these places were hit so often. Over time, Viking activity grew beyond short coastal raids. Small attacks could develop into larger expeditions. Fleets grew in size. Some groups returned again and again to the same regions, learning local geography and political weakness. What began as seasonal raiding in some areas gradually turned into overwintering, tribute-taking, conquest, and settlement. This was one of the great turning points of the Viking Age. The men arriving by ship were no longer always temporary visitors. In some places, they intended to stay. England became one of the most important centers of this expansion. At first, Scandinavian raiders struck monasteries and coastal settlements, but by the 9th century, much larger armies began arriving. These forces were not merely seeking a quick haul of treasure before sailing home. They were prepared for extended campaigns. Kingdoms in England at that time were divided and often vulnerable, and Viking leaders took advantage of those divisions. Large parts of northern and eastern England came under Scandinavian control, an area later associated with the Danelaw. Here, Viking influence was not just military. It shaped law, settlement patterns, language, trade, and everyday life. This is one of the most important truths about Viking expansion. When they settled, they changed the places they entered, but they were also changed by them. A settlement is different from a raid. People who stay must farm, trade, marry, negotiate, and govern. They must build relationships with the land and with neighbors. In England, Scandinavian settlers became part of a mixed world where Norse customs met Anglo-Saxon traditions. Place names, legal ideas, and vocabulary still preserve some of that influence. Even ordinary words in English today carry traces of Old Norse contact, which is a quiet reminder that the Viking Age was not only about fear and conflict, but also about blending and adaptation. In Ireland, Vikings first appeared as raiders too, but they also became founders of towns. This surprises many people because the usual image of Vikings is of destruction rather than urban development. Yet in places such as Dublin, Scandinavian influence became part of the growth of major trading centers. Viking towns connected local economies to wider maritime networks, bringing goods and people across the Irish Sea and beyond. They traded in silver, cloth, weapons, slaves, and many other goods. The Viking Age in Ireland was marked by warfare, alliances, rivalries, and cultural exchange, all unfolding in a complex landscape where Norse and Irish powers constantly interacted. In Francia, the lands that would later become part of France, Viking forces repeatedly attacked river systems that carried them deep inland. This was another reason their ships mattered so much. Rivers were pathways into the heart of kingdoms. Towns and monasteries far from the open sea could still be reached if a longship or other vessel could travel upriver. These attacks placed enormous pressure on rulers, who were sometimes forced to pay tribute in silver just to persuade Viking groups to leave. In time, however, one of the most remarkable changes of the Viking Age took place there. A Viking leader was granted land in what became Normandy, and from that foothold emerged a new political power. The descendants of Scandinavians in Normandy would later shape the history of England and Europe in dramatic ways. This is one of the quiet ironies of the age. Men once feared as outsiders could become rulers and founders of lasting states. Not every Viking expedition was mainly about plunder. Trade remained deeply entangled with raiding throughout the period. In some places, the same maritime skill that allowed sudden attack also allowed peaceful exchange. Viking merchants moved through a world that stretched astonishingly far, from the North Atlantic to the rivers of Eastern Europe, from the British Isles to the markets of the Islamic world. Silver flowed into Scandinavia in large quantities, especially through eastern routes. Scales, weights, hack silver, and imported goods reveal how active and sophisticated Viking trade could be. A person in Scandinavia might wear ornaments shaped by local taste, but made possible by metal and material that had traveled through many hands and many lands. The eastern roots of the Viking Age deserve special attention because they expand the story far beyond Western Europe. Scandinavian travelers, especially from what is now Sweden, moved along river systems through Eastern Europe toward the Black Sea and the Caspian. These routes connected them to Slavic communities, steppe peoples, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic caliphates. Some became traders, some warriors, some political actors in emerging states. In Byzantium, Scandinavian warriors served in the famous Varangian Guard, an elite bodyguard unit for the emperor. Imagine the distance involved in that journey. Men from the cold forests and coasts of the north standing in the service of one of the greatest imperial courts in the medieval world. The Viking Age, when viewed this way, feels less like a narrow northern episode and more like a network stretching across continents. Still, it is worth remembering that expansion abroad depended on structure at home. A leader did not simply decide one day to cross the sea alone. He needed followers, ships, provisions, weapons, and some promise of gain. Crews had to trust one another. Ships had to be built and maintained. Families had to manage the farm in the absence of men who left seasonally or for longer periods. Raiding and voyaging therefore rested on a larger social base. The dramatic moment when ships landed on a foreign shore was made possible by countless acts of preparation in Scandinavian communities. Trees cut for planks, iron forged into rivets, sails woven, food stored, alliances made, ambitions nurtured. Weapons were, of course, part of this world, and their symbolic power mattered almost as much as their practical use. Spears, axes, swords, shields, bows, and sea axes all had their place, though not everyone would have owned the most expensive items. Swords in particular could be costly and prestigious. Many warriors likely fought with simpler equipment because a weapon was also a sign of wealth and status. Shields formed a crucial part of defense, and the image of a warrior with shield and spear was probably more common than the image of a richly armed noble with a fine sword. Popular imagination often exaggerates the uniformity of Viking warriors, but in truth, equipment varied depending on resources, rank, and circumstance. The famous Viking axe deserves a quiet moment of attention because it is so often imagined only as a brutal emblem of war. In reality, axes were also everyday tools. Wood had to be cut, shaped, and worked constantly in Scandinavian life. Boats, houses, furniture, tools, and repairs all depended on skill with timber. The same object could therefore belong to both domestic and martial worlds. This overlap is telling. Viking society did not divide peace and violence into entirely separate realms. The people who farmed, built, sailed, and traded were often the same people who could fight when needed. The warrior did not exist apart from the household. He emerged from it. This helps explain why the Viking Age could produce both terror and resilience. A society trained by hard landscapes and practical demands often created individuals used to risk, endurance, and improvisation. Long-distance travel required confidence and discipline. Raiding required nerve and cooperation. Settlement required patience and negotiation. Trade required trust and calculation. The same culture could produce all these things because they grew from shared foundations: mobility, household strength, local loyalty, and a willingness to seize opportunity. As Viking activity intensified, European rulers gradually adapted. Defenses improved, fortifications were strengthened, fleets were built in response. Political leaders learned, often painfully, that they had to take seaborne threats seriously. In England especially, resistance became more organized under rulers who sought not merely to survive raids, but to confront and reverse Scandinavian gains. The story of Viking expansion is therefore also the story of how the rest of Europe changed because of it. Kingdoms centralized, military systems adjusted, and frontiers hardened in part because of northern pressure. The Vikings did not simply enter history. They forced other societies to change their shape. And yet, for all the drama of war, the larger pattern remains more complex than conquest alone. The Viking Age spread people, stories, goods, techniques, and words across a huge world. It opened routes, created hybrid cultures, and tied remote regions together. Men left Scandinavian shores seeking silver, land, and glory. But what they helped create was something larger than any single raid. They became part of the making of medieval Europe and the North Atlantic world. So when we picture the outward movement of the Viking Age, it is helpful to imagine not just a single fleet attacking a monastery, but a much wider tide. Ships move through mist and river light. Traders weigh silver in busy ports. Settlers clear land in unfamiliar places. Warriors bargain with kings. Rulers fear the next summer's sails. Somewhere in Scandinavia, a family waits for news from the sea. The Viking Age expanded because it was carried by more than violence alone. It was carried by skill, ambition, and a restless ability to turn the horizon into a road. For all the distance the Vikings traveled, and for all the fear their raids inspired, most people living in the Viking Age spent the greater part of their lives much closer to home. They rose in the dim light of northern mornings, worked fields and shorelines, tended animals, repaired tools, cooked meals, spun thread, mended clothing, and measured the year not by famous battles, but by the turning of the seasons. This is one of the most useful ways to understand the Viking Age properly. The men who sailed west to raid monasteries or east to trade along river routes came from ordinary households. Behind every longship was a world of farms, families, craft, law, and belief. Without that quieter world, the dramatic one could never have existed. A Viking farm was not simply a place of residence. It was the center of production, identity, inheritance, and survival. In many parts of Scandinavia, farmland was limited, and the quality of the land could vary sharply. Some valleys, lowlands, and coastal stretches offered good conditions for crops and pasture, while other regions were harder, more marginal, and dependent on careful management. A family's success depended on how well it could use every available resource. Fields had to be prepared and maintained. Hay had to be gathered before winter. Animals had to be fed, sheltered, bred, and protected. Wood had to be cut for fuel and building. Fish had to be caught and preserved. Nothing in such a life was casual, because the margin between comfort and hardship could be small. The longhouse was the heart of this household world. To modernize, the word can sound grand, but many longhouses were practical structures designed to serve multiple functions at once. Built from timber, turf, wattle, and other local materials, they were meant to endure cold weather, wind, and long seasons of indoor life. Inside, the central fire gave heat and light. Benches or sleeping platforms lined the sides. Tools, storage chests, woven cloth, and domestic equipment all had their place. Smoke gathered overhead and escaped imperfectly, giving the interior a dim and atmospheric quality that must have shaped daily experience in ways difficult to imagine now. In some households, animals were brought under the same roof or into connected spaces during harsh periods, further reminding us how closely human survival was tied to livestock. There was no strict division between home and workplace. The house was a workshop as much as a shelter. Food was processed there. Wool was spun and woven there. Leather was handled there. Repairs were made there. Children learned by watching and participating in tasks from an early age. Stories were told there in firelight during dark seasons. Guests might be welcomed there, alliances discussed there, and disputes remembered there. A longhouse held the practical life of the household, but also its memory and its status. To own and maintain a successful household was one of the clearest signs of social standing in the Viking Age. Women played central roles in this world, though the exact shape of those roles could vary by place and rank. In the daily running of the farm and home, women's labor was indispensable. Textile production alone was a major and highly skilled undertaking. Wool had to be sheared, cleaned, prepared, spun into yarn, woven into cloth, and turned into garments, sails, blankets, and other necessary goods. This was not minor decorative work. It was one of the economic foundations of the household. Clothing, bedding, storage textiles, and even the sails that powered ships required immense labor. In a world where most things were not bought ready-made, the ability to produce fabric and manage domestic resources was essential. Women also handled food preparation, household organization, and often the management of stores and keys, which later tradition sometimes treated as symbols of authority within the household. In the absence of men who traveled, traded, fought, or attended assemblies, women may have had even greater responsibility for keeping the household functioning. The Viking Age was not an equal society in the modern sense, but it would be a mistake to imagine women as passive figures in the background. The household was too important for that. The labor, judgment, and continuity women provided were part of what kept Viking society stable enough to sustain all its outward activity. Children grew up in a world where practical skill mattered early. They learned not through abstraction, but through participation. A child might help tend animals, carry water, gather fuel, watch younger siblings, or begin learning a craft. Knowledge was passed down through doing. How to handle tools, how to prepare for winter, how to row, how to recognize changing weather, how to behave at gatherings, how to remember kinship ties and obligations. These were lessons woven into life itself. Childhood in the Viking Age likely included affection, play, and storytelling, but it also prepared the young for useful contribution. Survival gave education a practical edge. Food in the Viking world reflected both local conditions and seasonal necessity. Diet varied by region, wealth, and access to resources, but common elements likely included grains such as barley, oats, and rye, dairy products from cattle, sheep, or goats, fish in many forms, and meat when available. Stews, porridges, bread, preserved foods, and fermented drinks were part of ordinary life. In coastal areas, the sea was a generous provider. Inland farming and animal husbandry shaped the table more strongly. Gathering wild foods, hunting, and fishing could supplement the household supply. Storage mattered greatly. People had to think not only about today's meal, but about survival through winter and lean periods. Drying, smoking, salting, fermenting, and careful management of stores were all part of the household economy. Clothing in the Viking Age was practical, but not without beauty. People wore garments suited to climate and work, often made of wool and linen. Tunics, dresses, cloaks, trousers, leg wrappings, and simple footwear formed the basis of everyday dress, though style and details varied. Brooches, pins, beads, and other adornments show that people cared about presentation as well as utility. Fine textiles and ornament could signal status, wealth, and taste. Even in a hard-working world, appearance mattered. To be well-dressed was not necessarily vanity. It could be a statement of place in society, of household prosperity, and of respect for occasion. Craftsmanship, more broadly, was one of the quiet marvels of the Viking Age. Woodworkers, smiths, weavers, leather workers, bone carvers, shipbuilders, and other artisans shaped the material world of the time. Many households likely handled ordinary making and repair themselves, but specialist skill also existed, especially in larger settlements and trade centers. Ironworking was especially important. Tools, nails, weapons, rivets, and fittings all depended on access to iron and the ability to work it well. A blacksmith was therefore a figure of enormous practical importance. Shipbuilding, too, required high levels of knowledge, from selecting timber to shaping planks and fastening hulls. The famous mobility of the Viking world rested on deep reserves of craft intelligence. Trade touched daily life more than people sometimes assume. Even households rooted in local farming were connected, directly or indirectly, to wider networks. Certain goods could not be produced everywhere. Soapstone, iron, whetstones, amber, furs, walrus products, fine cloth, glass beads, silver, and imported luxuries moved through markets and exchange systems of varying scale. Small local trade and large international trade were linked parts of the same world. A farming community in Scandinavia might seem remote, yet objects found in graves and settlements show contact with places astonishingly far away. The Viking Age joined the local and the global in ways that feel surprisingly modern. Social rank shaped experience throughout this world. Not everyone lived equally. There were wealthy chieftains and large landowners, ordinary free farmers, dependent workers, and slaves, often called thralls. Slavery was a real and painful part of Viking society. Captives taken in raids could be sold, forced to work, or absorbed into households in subordinate conditions. Thralls performed labor that supported the economy and status of those above them. Their lives were more vulnerable, their freedom limited, and their legal standing weaker. Remembering this is important because it prevents us from turning the Viking Age into a romantic world of brave sailors alone. It was also a society with hierarchy, coercion, and unequal power. Honor and reputation shaped many social relationships. In smaller communities, people lived among those who knew their family history, their alliances, their quarrels, and their standing. A person's word mattered. Generosity could build loyalty. Cowardice could damage standing. Feuds could grow from injury or insult, especially where legal settlement failed or was rejected. At the same time, hospitality was valued. Welcoming guests, sharing food and drink, and behaving properly within social expectations all played roles in maintaining respect. A community could be supportive, but it could also be unforgiving. In such a world, memory had force. What others remembered about you could shape opportunities for years. This helps explain why storytelling mattered so much. Even before the sagas were written down centuries later, oral tradition must have been central to how people understood themselves. Family histories, heroic tales, mythic stories, and remembered events preserved identity across generations. To know where one came from was to know something about one's place in the world. Story was not entertainment alone. It was social memory, moral reflection, and cultural continuity. Around the fire in the dark months, while tools were repaired and wool was worked, the Viking world was being carried forward not only through labor, but through words. Seasonality shaped everything. Spring meant preparation and renewal. Summer meant activity and movement. Autumn meant gathering and securing. And winter meant endurance. Travel, trade, raiding, and assembly often depended on weather and daylight. A failed harvest or severe winter could bring stress across the whole household. Good years created surpluses and possibilities. The natural world was not background scenery. It ruled time itself. The people of the Viking Age lived close to cycles that were visible, demanding, and inescapable. So when we step back from the noise of raids and royal struggle, the deeper rhythm of the Viking Age becomes easier to hear. It is the sound of looms and hammers, of animals and byres, of oars being repaired, of grain stored against the cold, of stories shared in smoky halls. It is the patience of women and men whose lives required practical intelligence every day. It is the ordinary discipline that made extraordinary journeys possible. The Viking Age was built not only by those who crossed oceans, but by those who kept the household standing, the food preserved, the cloth woven, the tools ready, and the memory of the community alive. Religion and belief were woven deeply into the Viking Age, not as something separate from daily life, but as part of the way people understood nature, fate, power, and the fragile path of human life. The world to them was not empty or silent. It was alive with forces, presences, and meanings that could not always be seen directly. Storms, harvests, illness, battle, childbirth, luck at sea, and the turning of the seasons all existed within a universe shaped by divine beings, ancient stories, and a powerful sense that life was guided not only by human effort, but also by larger patterns beyond human control. To understand the Viking Age fully, it is necessary to step into that world of belief, where myth and daily reality were never very far apart. The gods of the Norse world are among the most famous in history now, but during the Viking Age, they were not literary figures or entertainment. They were part of a living religious tradition. Odin, Thor, Freya, Freyr, Tyr, Loki, and others belonged to a sacred cosmos that helped people make sense of everything from war to fertility to death. These gods were not all-knowing, distant, or morally simple. They were powerful, complicated, often dangerous, and bound up in a universe that itself was unstable and fated to end in catastrophe. This gave Norse belief a tone unlike many later religious systems. Even the gods were not completely secure. They too moved toward a final reckoning. Thor was likely one of the most widely honored gods in everyday life. Strong, direct, and associated with thunder, protection, and physical power, he seems to have held special importance for ordinary people. His hammer, Mjolnir, became one of the best-known sacred symbols in the Viking world. Small hammer pendants have been found in archaeological contexts, and they may have served as signs of devotion, protection, or identity. Thor was a defender of gods and humans against chaotic forces, especially giants, and in that sense, he was a figure of order in a dangerous world. A farmer looking at a violent sky, or a traveler moving through uncertain landscapes, may have found comfort in such a god. Odin, by contrast, was a more mysterious and unsettling figure. He was associated with wisdom, poetry, hidden knowledge, magic, kingship, and war, but not in a simple or comforting way. Odin was a seeker, willing to sacrifice deeply in pursuit of knowledge. He was linked with the dead, with battle, with elite power, and with forms of insight that came at a cost. He did not represent safety so much as depth, intensity, and the darker side of understanding. That complexity made him powerful in a different register from Thor. Where Thor protected, Odin transformed. Where Thor stood strong in the storm, Odin crossed into danger to gain what others could not. Freya was associated with love, beauty, desire, fertility, and also death and magical practice, reminding us again that Norse belief did not divide the world into simple categories. Freyr, often connected to fertility, peace, prosperity, and good harvests, mattered especially in a society where successful farming could mean survival. Other divine beings and sacred figures filled out the religious world: goddesses, giants, elves, dwarfs, spirits, and unseen forces that shaped the land and the boundaries between worlds. This was a mythic universe, rich with movement and tension, where different powers interacted, struggled, and influenced human lives. The cosmos itself was imagined as structured yet vulnerable. At the center of many later accounts stands Yggdrasil, the great world tree that binds different realms together. Around and through this vast structure existed worlds of gods, humans, giants, and the dead. This image suggests that the Norse universe was interconnected, layered, and alive, but it was not eternal in a peaceful way. One of the most striking features of Norse myth is the idea of Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, a final destructive struggle in which gods and monsters clash. The world is shaken apart, and even great divine beings fall. Yet the story does not always end only in ruin. In some versions, a renewed world follows. This mixture of destruction and continuation may have given the mythology a powerful emotional force. It acknowledged loss without imagining that loss was the final end of all things. That sense of fate ran strongly through Viking Age culture. The idea that a life had a destined shape, or that death might come when it must, seems to have had real social and emotional weight. This did not make people passive. On the contrary, the presence of fate may have made courage more meaningful. If life could not be fully controlled, then what mattered was how a person met their circumstances. Reputation, bravery, endurance, and dignity in the face of danger became all the more important in such a worldview. This is one reason why so many later stories rooted in the Viking world are filled with strong characters facing inevitable outcomes. The emotional center of those stories is not avoiding fate, but meeting it well. Religious practice in the Viking Age likely varied a great deal from one place to another. There was no single scripture, no universal church structure, and no one authority controlling belief across all Scandinavia. Practices were local, flexible, and tied to community traditions. Sacred groves, special landscapes, temples or cult buildings in some places, burial mounds, and household rituals may all have played roles. Offerings and sacrifices were part of this world. Animals were certainly sacrificed, and in some accounts, human sacrifice appears as well, though the evidence and interpretation can be debated depending on place and source. What seems clear is that exchange between humans and the divine was important. Gifts, offerings, and ritual acts were ways of maintaining relationship, favor, and balance. Seasonal gatherings may also have had religious significance. Midwinter observances, feasts tied to harvest or fertility, and communal ceremonies helped mark the year and strengthen social bonds. In a society closely tied to cycles of nature, religion would naturally reflect those rhythms. A good harvest, healthy livestock, calm seas, and strong kinship were not merely practical hopes. They were also sacred concerns. Religion was therefore not only about cosmic stories, it was also about survival, blessing, and the maintenance of order in a fragile world. Death occupied a central place in Viking belief and ritual. Burial customs varied widely, which itself tells us something important. Some people were buried in graves with goods, weapons, jewelry, tools, ships, or animal remains. Others were cremated. Burial mounds could make memory visible in the landscape, tying the dead to place and lineage. Ship burials, among the most famous Viking Age practices, reveal the symbolic power of the vessel, not only in life, but in death. A ship could represent journey, status, identity, and movement into another realm. Grave goods suggest that the dead were not always imagined as simply gone. They may continue in another state, requiring equipment, symbols of standing, or offerings that reflected their place in society. The afterlife in Norse belief was not described in one simple, universal way. Modern popular culture often reduces everything to Valhalla, the hall of the slain, but the reality appears more complex. Valhalla was associated with Odin and with selected warriors slain in battle, but it was not necessarily the destination for everyone. Other possibilities existed, including associations with Freya and with Hel, which in the older Norse sense was not exactly the later Christian Hell, but rather a realm of the dead. The diversity of burial practices and mythic references suggests that beliefs about the afterlife may have been varied, fluid, and shaped by status, local tradition, and changing religious influences. Magic and ritual specialists also belonged to this world. Certain forms of ritual knowledge, sometimes linked in later sources to Seder, were associated with altered states, prophecy, fate, and the manipulation of unseen forces. These practices could carry both fascination and social tension. The idea that some people might cross boundaries of ordinary knowledge, see what others could not, or influence events through ritual, added another layer to the spiritual landscape. In a world where dream, omen, and intuition could hold meaning, the unseen was not easily dismissed. Over time, however, this religious world encountered one of the biggest transformations of the Viking Age, the spread of Christianity. At first, Christian influence came through contact with the outside world. Vikings raided Christian monasteries, traded in Christian lands, served Christian rulers, and settled among Christian populations. Gradually, Christianity moved north, not only as a foreign faith, but as a political and cultural force. Kings saw advantages in conversion. Christianity could support stronger royal authority, connect rulers to the wider European world, and provide new forms of legitimacy. Missionaries arrived, churches were built, burials slowly changed, symbols shifted. This was not an instant replacement of one world by another. For a long time, old and new beliefs likely overlapped. People may have worn both hammer symbols and crosses. Some accepted baptism for political or practical reasons before older traditions disappeared. Conversion probably unfolded unevenly, region by region, generation by generation. In some places, it may have been peaceful and gradual, in others tied to pressure from rulers. What makes this transformation so fascinating is that it occurred within a society already deeply shaped by strong mythic traditions. Christianity entered not a blank space, but a world full of gods, stories, rituals, and sacred memory. The end of the Viking Age is often connected to this long Christianization process, but the old beliefs did not vanish without leaving marks behind. They remained in story, in place names, in poetry, in symbolism, and later in the Icelandic texts that preserved much of what modern people know about Norse mythology. By the time those texts were written down, Scandinavia was Christian, which means the old religion survives, partly through later eyes. Even so, enough remains to reveal a spiritual world of extraordinary richness. So when we imagine the Viking Age at its deepest level, we should picture more than ships and swords. We should picture a hall at night, firelight moving across carved wood, voices telling stories of gods and giants, a storm sounding outside, and people listening with the knowledge that they lived in a world both beautiful and uncertain. They believed the universe had meaning, but not always comfort. They believed in strength, but also in fate. They believed that what was seen was only part of what existed. And in that blend of courage, mystery, and cosmic imagination, the spiritual heart of the Viking Age begins to come into view. As the Viking Age continued, the people of Scandinavia were no longer known only for what they took from foreign shores. They also became known for how far they could travel, how skillfully they could adapt, and how widely they could connect different parts of the world. Few things capture the spirit of the age more clearly than this restless movement across sea and river, from the stormy North Atlantic to the warm markets of the East. The Viking world was astonishingly mobile. It stretched far beyond what many people imagine when they picture only raiders in longships. In truth, the Viking Age was also an age of exploration, migration, commerce, and contact on a scale that made Scandinavia part of a much larger medieval network. To begin with, the sea itself must be understood not as empty distance, but as a living highway. For the people of Scandinavia, water was often the fastest and most practical way to move. Coastlines were long and broken, rivers reached deep inland, and islands formed natural stepping stones across northern waters. A skilled sailor did not see the sea as a blank void. He saw routes, risks, landmarks, currents, winds, and opportunities. This maritime intelligence was one of the great foundations of Viking success. It made possible not only raids, but trade, resettlement, diplomacy, and discovery. The horizon invited movement. The westward voyages remain among the most famous. Norwegian seafarers and settlers moved into the North Atlantic in ways that permanently changed the map of the medieval world. The settlement of the Faroe Islands and Iceland opened a new chapter in human life in the Northern Ocean. Iceland in particular became one of the great achievements of Viking expansion, not because it was wealthy in the ordinary sense, but because it became a full society transplanted across sea and distance. Families crossed dangerous waters carrying livestock, tools, household goods, and ambitions for a new beginning. They did not arrive in a ready-made landscape. They had to adapt to a raw and demanding environment, build farms, establish law, and create order in a land with no previous state structure to receive them. This tells us something very important about Viking skill. It is one thing to raid a coast for a few days and leave. It is another thing entirely to transport a functioning society across the ocean. Settlement required confidence in navigation, shipbuilding, food management, social organization, and long-term planning. It required memory, too, because people had to carry not just goods, but customs, legal traditions, and cultural expectations with them. Iceland became a place where much of the Old Norse world took root in new soil. It would later preserve some of the most important texts about the Viking Age and Norse myth, but even before that, its existence was already proof of extraordinary maritime ability. From Iceland, the horizon stretched even farther. Greenland was settled by Norse colonists under difficult and uncertain conditions, creating one of the boldest frontier societies of the medieval period. Life there could never have been easy. The climate was severe, the land challenging, and survival depended on careful adaptation. Yet the very fact that settlements were established there shows how far Viking ambition could extend. Greenland was not the end of the story either. From that edge of the known world, Norse voyagers eventually reached North America. Archaeological evidence at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland confirms that people from the Viking world established a presence there around 5 centuries before Columbus. This is one of the most remarkable facts of the Viking Age, and it deserves to be felt properly. Men and women from a society of wooden hulls, woven sails, and iron rivets crossed not only the North Sea and the Atlantic Islands, but reached the edge of another continent. Their contact with North America was limited and did not lead to permanent long-term colonization in the same way as Iceland, yet the achievement remains extraordinary. It reminds us that Viking exploration was not accidental wandering. It was the result of generations of maritime knowledge, boldness, and the practical ability to survive in unknown places. The sagas later told stories of these Western voyages with a mixture of memory, pride, and narrative shaping. While the sagas were written after the Viking Age and must be used carefully, they preserve the sense that such journeys belonged to the self-understanding of the Norse world. Exploration was not outside their identity, it was part of it. To travel far was dangerous, but also honorable. The sea offered wealth, land, knowledge, and fame. To cross it was to test oneself against distance and uncertainty. Yet the Viking Age was not only oriented westward. In some ways, the eastern routes may be even more astonishing because they reveal how deeply Scandinavians were drawn into the great commercial and political systems of Eurasia. Swedish-linked groups traveled through the river networks of Eastern Europe, moving south along the Volga, the Dnieper, and other waterways. These routes connected the Baltic world to the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, Byzantium, and the Islamic caliphates. Along these paths, Scandinavian merchants, warriors, and political actors encountered Slavic communities, Finnic groups, steppe peoples, and major imperial powers. Silver was one of the great motors of this Eastern world. Huge quantities of Islamic silver coins, often called dirhams, found their way into Scandinavia through trade networks that stretched across continents. Many of these coins have been discovered in hoards, sometimes cut into pieces as hack silver, and weighed for exchange rather than used as coinage in the modern sense. This silver transformed the economy of the Viking world. It could be turned into ornaments, used in exchange, stored as wealth, or distributed by leaders seeking loyalty. When we think of the Viking Age as a silver age as much as a seafaring one, the picture becomes fuller. Long-distance trade did not merely accompany raiding. It reshaped Scandinavian society from within. The eastern routes also gave rise to one of the most fascinating institutions associated with Viking mobility, the Varangian Guard. Scandinavian warriors entered the service of the Byzantine emperor, serving as elite guards in Constantinople, one of the greatest cities in the medieval world. The contrast is astonishing. Men from the forests and fjords of the north stood in the ceremonial and military life of an empire whose wealth, architecture, and political traditions must have seemed dazzlingly different from anything in Scandinavia, and yet they were valued there. Their reputation for toughness, loyalty, and martial skill opened doors far beyond their homeland. Imagine the emotional scale of such a journey. A young man might leave a local world of kin, farms, and regional loyalties, travel through rivers and ports far from home, hear languages he did not know, see cities larger than any he had imagined, and enter the service of a ruler whose authority stretched across vast territories. The Viking Age made such lives possible. It was an age in which mobility could transform identity. Trade centers were crucial to all of this movement. Places such as Hedeby, Birka, and other emporia became hubs where goods, languages, technologies, and people met. These were not giant cities by later standards, but they were vibrant nodes in the Viking world. There one might find merchants exchanging furs, slaves, textiles, metal goods, amber, walrus ivory, whetstones, and imported luxuries. Weights and scales reveal a culture comfortable with measured exchange. Craft production flourished in such settlements. So did cultural blending. A market town could bring together local farmers, foreign merchants, craftsmen, political envoys, and travelers whose journeys linked multiple regions. The existence of these towns shows that the Viking Age was not only rural and martial, it also had urban energy in miniature. Settlements devoted to trade and manufacture reveal a society becoming more economically specialized and outward-looking. In these spaces, identity may have been more flexible than in isolated farming communities. People encountered foreign objects, styles, ideas, and habits. Goods from distant lands changed local tastes. The Viking world was still rooted in household production and kinship, but its commercial horizons were undeniably expanding. Ships remained the common thread through all these developments. Without ships, there would have been no Viking Age in the form we know it. The ship was not simply a vehicle. It was a technology of social expansion. It allowed a crew to move together, carry goods, impose force, settle new land, and return with stories and wealth. The quality of Viking shipbuilding lay not only in speed, but in balance. These vessels were light enough to be drawn ashore and flexible enough for varied conditions, yet strong enough for demanding waters. Their shallow draft allowed river travel and surprise movement inland. Their sails made distance manageable in new ways. A people with such ships could connect worlds others still experienced as far apart. Navigation itself likely combined practical observation, inherited route knowledge, familiarity with coastlines, currents, winds, stars, bird behavior, and perhaps other techniques still debated today. One should be careful not to romanticize this into mystical perfection. Sea travel remained dangerous. Storms, fog, misjudgment, and shipwreck were real threats. But repeated success over generations proves that Viking mariners possessed a high level of navigational competence. The ocean could never be controlled, yet it could be read. Migration during the Viking Age also reshaped identities in lasting ways. Scandinavian settlers abroad did not always remain culturally separate. In the British Isles, the North Atlantic Islands, parts of Francia, and Eastern Europe, Norse communities mixed with local populations, adopted local customs, and contributed their own. Language changed, law adapted, marriage linked different groups. Children grew up inheriting more than one world. This is one reason the Viking Age is so difficult to define neatly. It was not just the history of Scandinavians leaving home, it was also the history of new societies emerging from contact. Even the very idea of home shifted during this time. A settler in Iceland, a trader on the Volga, a warrior in Constantinople, a ruler in Dublin, and a farmer in Denmark all belonged in some way to the Viking world, but they lived very different versions of it. The age created a wider sense of possibility. It expanded the map in both practical and imaginative terms. Lands once remote became connected by memory and route. People who might once have spent their whole lives within local horizons could now imagine, or at least hear of, places astonishingly far away. This spread of knowledge must have affected storytelling deeply. Every returning traveler brought more than goods. He brought news, rumors, descriptions, and wonder. Tales of foreign rulers, great churches, strange customs, rich markets, dangerous coasts, and distant resources expanded the mental world of those who stayed behind. The Viking Age was therefore not only a period of physical movement, but of enlarged imagination. The known world grew broader in the mind, as well as on the sea. And still, amid all this movement, the emotional pattern remained familiar. People left because they sought something. Wealth, status, land, trade, service, adventure, perhaps escape. They traveled because the world had become reachable through ships and skill. But every departure also implied return, or the hope of return, even when it never came. Somewhere behind each voyage was a household, a shoreline, a set of kin, and the remembered shape of home. So when we think of the Viking Age at its farthest extent, we should picture not a single heroic voyage, but a vast web of movement stretching from Greenland to Constantinople, from the Irish Sea to the rivers of the East. We should picture silver weighed in busy ports, sails rising in cold harbors, foreign languages heard by firelight, and men and women carrying Scandinavian ways into new landscapes while bringing the wider world back with them. The Viking Age was not merely an eruption of violence from the north. It was one of the great ages of connection in medieval history, and its people reached farther than almost anyone around them could have imagined. As the Viking Age moved forward, it did not remain frozen in the image that later generations often prefer. A world of pagan warriors, dragon-proud ships, and distant raids under gray skies. Like every historical age, it changed from within. Power shifted. Kingdoms grew stronger. Old customs were challenged. Christian belief spread more deeply. Trade networks matured. Settlements became more stable. Leaders who might once have measured success mainly through raiding and personal followings increasingly had to think in terms of rule, law, diplomacy, taxation, and lasting authority. In this sense, one of the most fascinating parts of the Viking Age is not simply how it began, but how it slowly transformed into something else. At the beginning of the age, Scandinavia was politically fragmented. Authority was local, regional, and often unstable. Chieftains and petty kings competed for land, loyalty, and prestige. A leader's strength depended heavily on his ability to attract followers, reward them, and prove himself in public ways. Wealth taken in raids, won through trade, or gathered through tribute could be redistributed to build support. Gift-giving was not merely generosity, it was political strategy. A ruler who could give rings, weapons, silver land, or feasting opportunities strengthened the bonds around him. In a world without strong centralized institutions, power had to be constantly performed and renewed. But over time, this pattern began to shift. More organized kingdoms emerged, especially in Denmark and Norway, and eventually in Sweden as well, though the process was uneven and gradual. Kingship became more ambitious. Rulers did not want merely to lead successful war bands. They wanted more regular control over territory, law, religion, and succession. This required a broader kind of authority, one that extended beyond personal charisma or temporary military success. A king increasingly needed networks of loyal men, agreements with local elites, recognized legitimacy, and in many cases the support of the church. The Viking Age therefore became, in part, the story of how raiding societies evolved into more structured medieval kingdoms. Denmark offers one of the clearest examples of this development. Its position close to the continent, its involvement with the Frankish and later Christian worlds, and its strategic importance in the Baltic and North Sea, gave Danish rulers strong reasons to centralize. Defensive works, royal centers, and the famous ring fortresses associated with Harold Bluetooth suggest a kingdom becoming more organized and more deliberate in its projection of power. Harold himself is remembered not only as a ruler, but as a figure tied closely to the Christianization of Denmark. Whatever the exact pace and complexity of that process, it is clear that royal power and religious change increasingly reinforced one another. Christianity gave kings new tools. A baptized ruler could present himself as part of a broader European order, rather than as the leader of an isolated pagan people. He could claim a sacred legitimacy that connected rule not only to force and ancestry, but to divine favor in a Christian sense. The church, for its part, often supported stronger kingship because stability made conversion, administration, and ecclesiastical organization easier. Bishops, churches, and royal policy could begin to work together. This did not mean that conversion was always sincere in the modern personal sense, nor that it was accepted immediately by everyone. But it does mean that Christianity was not simply a private change of faith. It was also a transformation in political structure. In Norway, the process could be especially dramatic because geography made unity harder. Fjords, mountains, scattered settlements, and regional loyalties all complicated the growth of one kingdom. Yet rulers such as Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson became central to later memory, as kings associated with both unification and Christianization. The stories told about them, especially in later saga tradition, combine history, politics, and legend in powerful ways. What matters most for our purposes is that by the later Viking Age, Norway was increasingly being drawn into the same pattern seen elsewhere, a movement away from a looser world of competing chieftains and toward stronger monarchy tied to Christian institutions. This was not a smooth or peaceful transformation. Old loyalties did not disappear just because kings wished them to. Local leaders could resist, pagan traditions could persist. Conversion might be encouraged in one place, enforced in another, and only partially understood in a third. The Viking Age was full of overlap. People could live in a world where Christian symbols were becoming more visible, while older habits, sacred associations, and cultural values remained alive. In many communities, the new order arrived layer by layer, rather than all at once. A burial custom might change before storytelling did. A church might be built, while old place memory still carried sacred meaning. A ruler might accept baptism for political reasons before all his followers thought deeply about what that meant. One of the most revealing signs of change is the shift in the purpose of violence. Earlier in the Viking Age, violence often served mobility, sudden acquisition, and personal or group reputation. Raids were outward, opportunistic, and flexible. But as kingdoms strengthened, warfare increasingly became tied to territorial control, dynastic conflict, and state building. This does not mean raiding vanished overnight, but its place within society changed. A king wanted revenue, roads of communication, loyalty, and administration. He could not rely forever on a political culture built mainly around independent war leaders seeking gain abroad. Stronger monarchy required stronger internal order. The end of the Viking Age, then, is not best imagined as a sudden stopping point when ships simply ceased to sail and warriors vanished. Scandinavian people continued to travel, trade, fight, settle, and rule. What changed was the framework in which they did those things. The old Viking pattern of expansion no longer stood at the center of society in the same way. Instead, Scandinavian rulers and communities became more fully integrated into Latin Christian Europe. Their kings dealt with other monarchs as fellow Christian rulers. Their elites built churches and supported clergy. Their laws became more formalized. Their identities changed from looser, regional, and kin-based patterns toward more recognizably medieval kingdoms. England plays a particularly important role in this closing phase. Viking armies and rulers had shaped English history profoundly, but the tide eventually turned. The long struggle between Scandinavian powers and English kings reached major turning points under rulers like Alfred the Great, and later in the contests involving Danish kings such as Sweyn Forkbeard and Knut. Knut's rise is one of the most remarkable moments in the whole age because it shows just how far Viking political evolution had gone. Here was not simply a raider taking silver and leaving, but a Scandinavian ruler becoming King of England and presiding over a vast North Sea empire. His rule linked England, Denmark, and Norway in a political structure far beyond the horizon of the early raiding bands. Knut represents a mature phase of the Viking world, where Scandinavian power had become royal, diplomatic, and administrative as much as martial. His reign shows that the Viking Age did not move in a straight line, from violence to civilization, as older stereotypes might imply. Rather, it revealed the capacity of Scandinavian elites to master the tools of kingdom and empire. The same world that had once sent raiders to monasteries could now produce kings who governed Christian realms. That transformation is one of the deepest patterns of the age. And yet endings are rarely clean. Even as Christianity spread and monarchy strengthened, older heroic ideals remained attractive. Courage, honor, memory, loyalty, revenge, generosity, and personal reputation continued to matter. In some ways, these values were too deeply rooted to disappear. Instead, they were reworked within new contexts. Saga literature, though written later, preserves this tension beautifully. It remembers a world of fierce independence and old customs, even as it emerges from a Christian literary environment. The Viking Age survived in memory partly because people sensed that something powerful had been lost, as well as gained. The year 1066 is often treated as a symbolic endpoint for the Viking Age, especially because of the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada's failed invasion of England and his defeat at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. There is some logic to this. Hardrada's campaign feels in many ways like one last great echo of the old Viking warrior tradition, a final attempt by a Scandinavian king to win glory and rule through conquest across the North Sea. His defeat came just before the Norman conquest of England, itself led by descendants of Vikings who had long since become something else. This strange closeness of events gives 1066 a powerful sense of historical closure. The old age of Viking expansion fades, and a different medieval order takes firmer shape. But dates can only do so much. Historical ages do not end in a single moment for everyone. In remote communities, old patterns may have persisted longer. In the imagination, they certainly did. Ships were still built. Stories were still told. Families still remembered ancestors who had traveled, settled, fought, and worshipped in the older ways. The sea remained a road. The past remained present. What changed was not that Scandinavia stopped moving, but that it now moved within a more settled Christian and royal framework. The legacy of the Viking Age is therefore larger than the age itself. It survives in place, names across the British Isles and beyond, in language, in archaeology, in myth, in literature, in royal lineages, in the foundation of towns, in Atlantic settlement, and in the memory of extraordinary distance crossed by ordinary human means. It survives in the image of the longship, of course, but also in quieter ways, in law, in trade routes, in cultural blending, in the preservation of stories from Iceland, and in the sense that medieval Europe was more connected, more mobile, and more surprising than it can first appear. Perhaps that is the most fitting way to bring the Viking Age toward its close, not as the fading of a myth, but as the transformation of a living world. The people who began this age did not know they were entering a famous chapter of history. They were farmers, sailors, traders, craftspeople, rulers, poets, mothers, children, warriors, and wanderers, responding to the conditions of their time. Over generations, they reshaped the lands around them and were reshaped in return. They carried old gods into Christian centuries, local loyalties into growing kingdoms, and narrow coastlines into world-spanning horizons. So in the end, the Viking Age leaves us with more than battles and voyages. It leaves us with the image of a society in motion, changing as it expands, learning as it encounters others, and slowly becoming the medieval North that would follow. The longships do not disappear from memory. They remain at the shoreline of history, half in mist, half in legend, reminders of a people who once looked at cold northern waters and saw not an edge, but a path. One of the most fascinating things about the Viking Age is how much of it still survives in quiet, hidden traces, rather than only in dramatic stories. When people think of Vikings today, they often imagine shields, axes, ships, and battles. But much of what remains from their world is smaller and more intimate. It survives in fragments of combs, worn brooches, broken tools, gaming pieces, silver hoards, ship rivets, burial mounds, place names, and ordinary objects once held in ordinary hands. These traces matter because they bring the Viking Age down from the level of legend and back into human life. They remind us that behind every famous voyage was a person who ate, slept, worried, worked, hoped, and moved through daily routines in a world both harsh and beautiful. Archaeology has transformed our understanding of the Viking Age more than almost any written source alone ever could. The people of Scandinavia left no great historical chronicles of their own from the beginning of the period in the way some other civilizations did. Much of what outsiders first wrote about them came from those who feared them, fought them, or struggled to explain their sudden appearance. Christian monks, royal courts, and foreign observers often described Viking violence vividly, but naturally saw events from their own perspective. Archaeology gives us another way in. It lets the Viking Age speak through timber, iron, bone, cloth, glass, and earth. It reveals what people made, what they valued, how they buried their dead, where they traded, what they wore, and how widely they traveled. Burial sites are among the richest windows into this lost world. In graves, archaeologists sometimes find weapons, jewelry, tools, ships, household objects, animals, and carefully arranged possessions that suggest what mattered to the dead and to those who buried them. Some graves are simple, while others are astonishingly elaborate. The great ship burials of the Viking world remain some of the most moving archaeological discoveries in Europe because they seem to preserve both status and imagination at once. A ship was never just a ship in the Viking Age. It was movement, prestige, identity, and perhaps the perfect symbol for passage into death. To place a person within a vessel, or to shape a burial around seafaring imagery, was to express something profound about how life itself had been understood. Yet even the richest burials need care and interpretation. A grave does not always tell us exactly who a person was in life. It tells us how they were remembered, displayed, honored, or claimed in death. A weapon in a grave may suggest martial identity, but it can also signal status or symbolism. Jewelry may mark wealth, kinship, or role. Burial customs changed over time and varied across regions, especially as Christianity spread. Still, the cumulative picture is revealing. Viking Age burial practice shows a society deeply concerned with memory, lineage, visible status, and the relationship between the living and the dead. Some of the most interesting discoveries have also challenged older assumptions. For a long time, people too easily imagined Viking society in narrow and rigid ways, but archaeology has repeatedly made the picture more complex. It has shown the importance of women's status in some burial contexts, the sophistication of craft production, the international range of trade goods, and the presence of individuals whose lives do not fit simple categories. The Viking Age, like any human world, was more varied than stereotype allows. Some people were powerful, some were poor, some traveled far, some likely never left their home district. Some were born free, some were enslaved, some were buried with splendor, others vanished more quietly into the earth. Silver hoards are another extraordinary source of insight. Across Scandinavia and beyond, buried collections of coins, cut silver ornaments, and other valuables have been found hidden in the ground. Some may have been buried for safety in unsettled times and never recovered. Others may have had ritual or commemorative meaning. Whatever the reason, they reveal the enormous importance of silver in the Viking world. They also reveal connection. Coins from Islamic lands, for example, found in Northern Europe, are some of the clearest evidence of how deeply Viking trade routes reached into wider systems of exchange. A silver piece minted far to the southeast might eventually be cut, weighed, exchanged, and buried in Scandinavian soil. That journey tells a story of movement as dramatic in its own way as any raid. The towns and trading places of the Viking world tell another part of the story. Excavations at sites such as Hiddeby, Birka, Kaupang, Ribe, and others have revealed bustling communities where craft, commerce, and travel were part of daily life. These were places of noise, work, smell, bargaining, and constant motion. Iron was forged there, glass beads were made there, ships arrived and departed, foreign goods changed hands, news traveled, languages mixed. Such places reveal that the Viking Age was not only a rural world of isolated farms and sudden war bands. It also contained specialized settlements where economic life had real density and sophistication. In these places, one can almost sense the hum of a connected medieval world beginning to gather force. Textiles, though less glamorous to many people than weapons or ships, may actually be among the most revealing traces of Viking life. Fabric rarely survives as dramatically as metal, but when it does, it reminds us of the immense labor hidden inside ordinary existence. Clothing, sails, blankets, and household textiles required skill, patience, and time. The production of thread and cloth was a major part of economic life, especially within households. To think about textile work is to think about all the unseen hours that sustain the visible achievements of the age. A ship crossing the sea depended not only on shipwrights and sailors, but on the making of sails. A well-dressed household depended on spinning and weaving. The Viking Age rested on labor that history often romanticizes too little. Even the smallest objects can feel intimate across time. A comb suggests care for appearance and the habits of the body. A spindle whorl suggests skilled domestic work. A child's toy or gaming piece hints at leisure, learning, and quiet moments inside the household. A worn knife suggests repetition, repair, and everyday utility. Such objects reduce the distance between then and now. They reveal that however different the Viking Age may seem, the people within it still lived through familiar human textures of daily life. They lost things, repaired things, treasured things, carried things, and left behind evidence of their habits without ever intending to speak to us 1,000 years later. Place names preserve another layer of survival. Across parts of England, Scotland, Ireland, Normandy, Iceland, and other regions touched by Scandinavian settlement, the landscape still carries traces of Viking language and presence. Names can outlast buildings, dynasties, and even memory itself. A village, a river crossing, a coastal feature, or a farm name may preserve the echo of an older settlement pattern long after the original people are gone. Language, too, carries these traces. English in particular absorbed many Norse words, especially in areas of close contact, and some of those words are so ordinary now that most speakers never pause to think about their history. This is one of the quietest but most lasting Viking legacies. They are present not only in museums and ruins, but in speech itself. The later literary memory of the Viking world gives us yet another way the age survived. The Icelandic sagas, heroic traditions, kings' sagas, and mythological texts were written down after the Viking Age, often in a Christian environment looking back on an older world. That means they are not straightforward windows into the past. They shape, interpret, and sometimes idealize what came before. Yet they are still invaluable. They preserve names, conflicts, values, landscapes, and emotional patterns that likely reach back into the Viking past, even if filtered through later storytelling. What is so striking about these texts is their tone. They often treat courage, fate, revenge, law, and memory with a calm seriousness that feels entirely suited to the northern world from which they emerged. Through them, the Viking Age survived not only as fact, but as atmosphere. Modern fascination with Vikings has often exaggerated the wrong things. Popular culture tends to prefer fury over patience, battle over law, spectacle over household life, and myth over material reality. That is understandable in a way, because longships and warriors are vivid images. But the true richness of the Viking Age lies in its full balance. It was violent, yes, but also highly skilled. It was ambitious, but also domestic. It was outward moving, but deeply rooted in household and locality. It produced raiders, but also traders, settlers, poets, rulers, craftsmen, and storytellers. The real world of the Vikings is more interesting than the simplified one because it contains contradiction. It is a world of tenderness and brutality, practicality and imagination, mobility and belonging. There is also something moving about how incomplete our knowledge remains. Archaeology can recover a great deal, but never everything. Wood rots, cloth decays, voices vanish, whole lives leave only faint traces. The Viking Age survives in fragments, and perhaps that is part of why it continues to hold the imagination so strongly. We see enough to sense its texture, but not enough to remove its mystery entirely. A burial mound on a green slope, a ship impression in the earth, a piece of worked silver, a weathered runestone, a half-burned hall site, a foreign coin far from its place of minting. These are not only data, they are invitations. They ask us to imagine the human journeys that produced them. And when we do imagine those journeys, the Viking Age becomes vivid again in a quieter way. A woman fastens a brooch in a smoky hall before stepping into the morning cold. A trader weighs silver at a busy settlement near the water. A craftsman files the teeth of a comb. A child listens to a story while wind moves outside the longhouse walls. A sailor touches land after weeks at sea. A family buries one of their own beneath a mound that will watch the landscape long after their names are forgotten. These are not grand scenes of conquest, but they may come closer to the truth of how life was actually lived. That is perhaps the most beautiful legacy of the Viking Age. The deeper we look, the more it stops being a legend about Vikings and becomes a human world. Its people were never simply symbols of war or adventure. They were individuals living through a particular place and time, making choices within conditions they did not control, building homes, crossing seas, fearing death, honoring memory, and leaving behind enough of themselves that 1,000 years later, we can still follow their traces. So when the Viking Age reaches us now, it comes in many forms at once. It comes in saga and in soil, in myth and in metal, in place names and in burial mounds, in reconstructed ships, and in ordinary words spoken every day without thought. It comes not as a single image, but as a layered inheritance. And perhaps that is the most fitting way for such an age to remain, half illuminated, half mysterious, still drifting toward us across time, like a longship emerging slowly through northern mist. By the time the Viking Age was drawing toward its end, the world that had first sent out raiders, traders, settlers, and explorers was no longer quite the same world. The old rhythms of pagan sacrifice, local chieftain power, seasonal raiding, and loosely connected regional loyalties had not vanished all at once, but they were being reshaped by stronger kingship, Christian belief, and deeper integration with the rest of medieval Europe. The Viking Age did not end because Scandinavians suddenly stopped sailing or fighting. It ended because the society that had once produced Viking expeditions as one of its defining expressions was slowly becoming something more settled, more centralized, and more recognizably medieval in a new sense. This makes the ending of the Viking Age especially interesting because it was not simply a decline. In many ways, it was a transformation. The same peoples who had once terrified monasteries in river towns were now building churches, forming kingdoms, issuing laws, minting authority in more stable ways, and tying themselves into wider Christian networks of diplomacy, marriage, and power. Their world was changing from one held together largely by kinship, local prestige, and mobility into one increasingly shaped by monarchy, ecclesiastical institutions, and territorial rule. And yet, beneath those changes, many of the deeper values of the Viking Age remained visible. Honor still mattered, reputation still mattered, courage still mattered, memory still mattered. The old world did not disappear cleanly. It flowed into the new one. Christianity played a central role in this long transition. Earlier in the Viking Age, the Christian world had often appeared to Scandinavians as something foreign, wealthy, and sometimes vulnerable. Monasteries had been raided, priests and monks had been encountered as outsiders, and Christian kings had been rivals, trading partners, or political forces on distant shores. But with time, Christianity moved steadily northward, not only through missionaries, but through trade, diplomacy, royal ambition, and the simple fact of repeated contact. Scandinavian rulers could see that the Christian kingdoms to the south and west possessed not only wealth, but systems of legitimacy and organization that could strengthen a ruler's own position at home. A Christian king was different from an older chieftain in both image and structure. He could present himself not just as a successful war leader, but as a divinely sanctioned ruler with moral and political authority supported by the church. That mattered in a world where kings increasingly wanted not only followers, but obedience. Churches created centers of worship, literacy, administration, and social order. Clergy could support royal power, and royal power could support Christian expansion. In this sense, conversion was never only about belief in the private inward way people sometimes imagine today. It was also about the remaking of society. To convert a kingdom was, in part, to reorganize it. Yet old beliefs and habits did not simply vanish because rulers preferred a new faith. In many places, the transition must have been gradual, uncertain, and uneven. Some communities likely mixed old and new practices for generations. A cross might appear where once only a hammer pendant had been worn, but the deeper habits of memory and ritual did not change overnight. Burial customs shifted slowly. Sacred landscapes did not instantly lose their meaning. Stories of the old gods remained alive, even as churches rose. A person living in the late Viking Age might inhabit a world where Christian rites had become more visible, while older cultural instincts still shaped the imagination. This overlap is one of the reasons the end of the Viking Age feels so textured. It was not a door closing, it was a long twilight. At the same time, kingship in Scandinavia was becoming stronger and more ambitious. Earlier leaders had often depended on personal loyalty, gift-giving, and the success of raids or warfare to maintain support. But stronger monarchy required more than that. It required continuity, territorial control, systems of law, recognition, and administration. Kings needed to secure succession, manage rivals, hold regions together, and impose a sense of order over landscapes that had long been politically fractured. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden all moved through this process differently, but together they reveal a broader shift. The Viking Age world of many local powers was giving way to more durable kingdoms. This change also altered the role of violence. In the earlier Viking Age, raiding had often been a meaningful way to gain wealth, prestige, and advantage. It fit a world of mobility and opportunism, but in a more centralized society, independent raiding could become a problem rather than a strength. A king seeking stable control did not want too many autonomous war leaders acting on their own ambitions. Violence increasingly had to serve royal goals, dynastic disputes, territorial defense, or organized conquest, rather than the looser patterns of seasonal plunder that had defined earlier generations. The sea was still a road, but the political meaning of travel and warfare had changed. England remained one of the clearest places where this transformation could be seen. Over the centuries of Viking contact, Scandinavian forces had raided, settled, ruled, intermarried, and reshaped large parts of English life. The old image of Vikings as outsiders attacking from the sea had long since become too simple. By the later phase of the age, Scandinavian kings were not merely visiting England, they were competing to rule it. The rise of Knut showed just how far the world of Viking expansion had evolved. He was not a raider seizing treasure and leaving. He was a ruler of a North Sea empire, linking England, Denmark, and Norway in a political order that showed the full maturity of Scandinavian royal ambition. And yet even such power could not make the Viking Age permanent. The conditions that had once allowed small groups from Scandinavia to surprise and overwhelm their neighbors were no longer the same. European kingdoms had adapted, defenses had improved, political systems had shifted, Scandinavian society itself had changed. The age of the great open-ended Viking expansion could not continue forever because the world around it had learned, responded, and transformed. Just as important, Scandinavia had been transformed by its own success. A society cannot become richer, more connected, more royal, and more Christian without also ceasing to be the same kind of frontier world it once was. This is why the year 1066 feels so powerful as a symbolic endpoint. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, launched an invasion of England in a campaign that in many ways feels like one of the final great echoes of the old Viking spirit. Bold, martial, far-reaching, and centered on conquest across the sea. His defeat at Stamford Bridge has often been treated as the closing act of the Viking Age. There is poetry in that interpretation, especially because only weeks later England would be conquered by the Normans, themselves descended from Vikings who had long since become part of a different political and cultural world. In that strange chain of events, the Viking Age seems to pass directly into a new medieval order, but the truth is more subtle than a date on a page. The Viking Age did not end one autumn day for everyone at once. In some communities, old customs and memories continued. In others, new ways had already taken root long before. History rarely ends cleanly. It changes texture. The longship remains, but now it belongs to a Christian king. The warrior remains, but now he may fight in the service of a more centralized state. The old stories remain, but now they are remembered in a society that sees them as part of a fading past. The sea remains, but it no longer carries quite the same promise of sudden transformation as it did in the age's earliest generations. What did remain, however, was legacy. The Viking Age left its marks everywhere it had touched. It left settlements in Iceland and Greenland and brief contact with North America. It left towns and trade networks, silver hoards and burial mounds, ship graves and rune stones. It left Scandinavian influence in England, Ireland, Normandy, the North Atlantic Islands, and the Eastern River worlds. It left words in the English language and place names scattered across landscapes far from Scandinavia itself. It left stories that would be written down generations later in Iceland, preserving a memory of gods, heroes, feuds, kings, and voyages that still shape how the medieval North is imagined. But perhaps its deepest legacy is not any single artifact or tale. Perhaps it is the image of a society that learned to see the horizon differently. The people of the Viking Age looked at rivers, oceans, and unknown coasts not simply with fear, but with intention. They treated distance as something that could be crossed. They turned local skill into world-changing movement. They brought Scandinavia into contact with realms as distant as Byzantium and the Islamic caliphates, and they carried their own ways into islands and kingdoms far across the sea. That instinct to move, to connect, to test what lay beyond the known shore gave the Viking Age its force. And so in the end, the Viking Age should not be remembered only as an era of raids or as a gallery of famous warriors. It was a complete human world. It was built by farmers in narrow valleys, women managing households and producing the cloth that held everyday life together, craftsmen shaping wood and iron, traders weighing silver in busy ports, settlers carving out existence on unfamiliar coasts, sailors reading currents and weather, rulers seeking greater authority, and storytellers preserving the memory of all of it. Its violence was real, but so was its intelligence. Its harshness was real, but so was its imagination. Its achievements were not only destructive, they were also creative, connective, and enduring. When we look back on the Viking Age now, what lingers is not only the sight of longships cutting through cold water, though that image will always remain powerful. What lingers is the sense of movement itself, a people shaped by demanding landscapes, practical skill, and bold horizons, leaving their mark on the medieval world in ways far greater than anyone at the time could have guessed. They began as scattered societies in the north and became one of the defining forces of an age. Then slowly, they changed into something new. So the Viking Age comes to rest, not with a sudden silence, but with a gradual settling of waters. The ships are still there in memory. The old gods still flicker in story. The mounds still rise from the earth. The traces remain in language, law, myth, and landscape. And somewhere in that long fading from raiding world to Christian kingdom, from local chieftain to crowned ruler, from pagan hall to church bell, the age finds its true ending, not as a vanished legend, but as a living past that still drifts toward us across time.